Well, I've never met an oily boily, but I'm sure there are some out there.
Please DM us, oily boilies. We gotta know everything about you.
We just said, we need to have some financial conversations, and we were deliberate about it. And that's always what's worked for us.
And I know that that's a pretty hot take, especially in today's world of independence and I don't need a man and I'm my own person.
Women, independent.
Throw your hands up at me. Yeah. These are things that we wish we knew beforehand, so that we're going in equipped and not finding out the hard way.
Time for love again. My time for love is here.
Welcome back to Quality Time with Gabe and Grace.
I'm Gabe.
And I'm Grace. And this is episode 13.
13, baby.
Let's go.
Unlucky number 13.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, as they say, but we don't really believe in that.
Yeah, we're not here for that.
Rebuke it in Jesus' name.
So I'm excited to dive in. Last week we talked about sort of our annual planning session, if you will.
Yes.
And we talked about kind of 8 different buckets that we categorize life into.
Yeah.
And we talk about how those things are going, how we want them to be going, what we're going to do to, progress in those areas in the year ahead. So we wanted to start breaking down a couple of them. I think that we got some feedback where people wanted to hear a little bit more about certain topics that we'd mentioned.
Yeah.
So this week we're going to kick off with...
We've been doing a lot of drum rolls, by the way. I mean, since that one episode.
Since that one.
Yeah. But anyways...
Finance. Finance is our topic today.
Yeah.
But before we jump into the deets about it, let's start out with a little quality over quantity. This is a segment of our show, if you're new to the show, that we like to just highlight something from the week. It could be a piece of content, an experience, something happening in your life, some product that's really bringing you joy. It's really just sticking out as quality.
Yeah.
And we just like to highlight one each, and that's what makes quality over quantity. So I guess I could kick us off if that's okay.
Yeah.
So mine this week is something very simple, but I might get all the oily girlies excited with this one.
That sounds scary.
That's what they call themselves, the oily girlies.
Oily girlies.
So I have it
What
right
the
here in my
heck does that
pocket.
mean? Where's
It's
it
just
going?
a little oil roller, but it's basically lavender and peppermint.
Show the camera. What's the brand? I mean, come
Well,
on.
I don't know the brand, something Maui here. My friend gifted it to me postpartum, and you're just fractionated coconut oil and lavender and peppermint. So you could actually make this yourself with they sell these little bottles on, I'm holding it so awkwardly. They sell these little bottles on Amazon. I've made some rollers before. You just get that fractionated coconut oil and then you just add drops in.
Totally.
So you can roll it right on your skin, and with a quality essential oil, that's safe to do. So peppermint, lavender, it's such a relaxation, and I just put it on every night before bed. I often put it on in the mornings too, or just if I'm stressed, I'll just roll a little bit on and take a big whiff. So I'm just shouting out essential oils this week. I wouldn't say I'm an oily girly. I've never really sold oils. That's what they call it, oily girly.
I'm learning.
I've never really sold oils or anything like that. I don't really own a lot of oils, but I really have an appreciation for it.
Gotcha.
And I would love to. I've owned a few diffusers. I always seem to break them somehow. We had a good one.
I think I might have broken the last one.
I think we accidentally snipped the cord or something. But so for some reason my oil era has never really taken fully off.
Yeah.
But, the roller seems to be the way for me to, make the best of it. So I just had to shout that out. It's something easy you can make at home, or, if you get a good brand, you can purchase a roller and just keep it in your pocket like me.
Nice. Wow. What does it take to be an oily boily?
An oily boily?
Oily boily.
Well, I've never met an oily boily, but I'm sure there are some out there.
Please DM us, oily boilies. We got to know everything about you.
It's a big industry, the oil business, You got to head out west and just dive in.
What does that mean? Head out west, gold?
Well, there's some oil companies out west, essential oil companies, and they're really big in Utah and stuff. It's a huge thing.
God, you were blowing
We
my
could have
mind.
a whole episode about that, I'm sure, and maybe interview an oily girly.
Oh my god!
But no, it's good
unhinged.
stuff.
Okay.
Essential oils, using nature's gift to us for our benefit.
Okay. Mine is in a totally different direction.
All right.
So obviously we announced that we're moving, and with that comes a lot of purging and selling and getting rid of stuff,
Which
and
I
kind of
love.
lightening the load. So we have had a storage unit for an unreasonable amount of time, mainly because of just my forgetfulness to cancel it or to get rid of the stuff, you know?
Yeah.
And so we had an office space in the Tampa Heights area. We got out of that office in advance of building the cabin in North Georgia. We thought we'll keep some of this furniture, and after construction is complete, then we'll take the furniture, drive it up there. We did not do that because once you made the drive, you realize like no one wants to take a U-Haul up
Into the
that
mountains,
that mountainous terrain, and especially our property in general has like compacted gravel that is compacted sometimes during the year, and then when in the rainy season, it can get a little sketchy, and we have to constantly maintain that. So I was watching like delivery trucks come when we were getting stuff shipped there, that like these are professional drivers almost dying on the rig. So I was scary. Like, maybe not. So anyways, we've had all this stuff, and now that we're moving, we're like, man, we really have to get rid of it.
Yeah.
So I've been listing it all on Facebook Marketplace, just going buck wild with like tons of listings. If you see me on Facebook, I'm sorry. Like I've just been, shamelessly begging people to buy our stuff. So the reason why I'm going with quality over quantity is because we had a large quantity of things, right? That we're selling, conference tables, desks, like big pieces from the office.
Yeah.
And I won't name his name because he's a complete stranger to me, but God bless this one gentleman that reached out this last week.
Quality customer?
Yeah, quality customer. And literally was like, Daddy Warbucks, like, I'll take it all, basically.
Nice.
Like he left like one piece, but basically paid for legitimately the entire storage unit.
That's the best.
Because he was outfitting his office in Tampa Heights, no less. And so it was just such a miracle and a gift from God. I was like stressing about, man, how are we going to get rid of this stuff? Because it's random.
It'll take
like,
a long time.
Facebook Marketplace to me, it's a lot more residential, personal type stuff that I see. So I'm like, only someone with an office is going to need this. And then sure enough, he gets there. We do a little bundle deal. I even gave him a little hookup to kind of take it all, Yeah. And so that was a huge, huge blessing. It's kind of freed us up to travel even lighter without stress and not like leave that storage unit behind, still paying for it.
It's a big thing crossed off the list.
Yeah, perfect timing. And he was British, which, if he
on.
watches, I mean, shout out, dude. The accent made it all the more
You can't
intriguing.
not love a Brit.
Yeah, it was like, I felt like I was doing some weird international negotiation. You know what I mean? I was like, what are we doing here? What am I selling you?
It.
That's my quality experience this week.
Well, let's get into this week's topic. So we said that we were going to jump into, I called them buckets, another bucket.
Buckets, keys, pillars.
Exactly. Call it what you
ideas.
like. It's something important in your life.
Yeah.
And so if we make space to plan for these areas in our lives, we can see them really thrive. We can see peace in these areas. And so the topic this week is how not to fail in your finances.
Yeah.
So finance being like one of those top arguments in marriages. It's one of the top sort of kickoffs that push couples towards divorce.
Yeah, unfortunately.
It can be a real issue, or it can be, an area of blessing and unity and focus if you are really diligent about being intentional with it within marriage specifically.
Yeah.
So of course this week's content, yes, it's going to be from a marriage lens. I always like to say too, though, if you're not married, don't tune out. Like I think you're still going to grasp a lot here because you can do these things as a single person as well. We're just talking within the context of our marriage, how we've kind of come together on finances.
And this could even serve then as sort of, preventative type wisdom that if you find yourself eventually in, a marriage relationship, these are things that we wish we knew beforehand, so that we're going in equipped and not finding out the hard way.
For sure. And I think of the word proactive, when I just mentioned that statistic, right, of like, they say that finance is one of the major fights within a marriage. Being proactive in this day and age to push away from even the concept or conversation of divorce, I think you have to be talking about things like finance from a pretty serious perspective. Yeah. So I'm excited to dive into this. I'm pretty passionate about like thriving marriages coming from a divorced family. I think that's something that becomes a real important value and focus for you. And so hopefully that resonates with others. I'm sure that it will. So we are going to talk through kind of 4 areas, 4 keys, 4 action points, if you will, that can move us towards a place of peace within finance and a place of thriving.
Yes.
So the first one's Unify. Do you want to break that down for us?
Totally.
You're kind of the spearheader when it comes to finances. There's always someone who's a little like better at the finances than the other, I think, within a marriage. And so I think we both have a mind for it, but you definitely kind of like geek out with finances.
Guilty.
So I'm going to let you sort of jump on that one.
Yeah, me, Friday night, a spreadsheet, it's a good time.
Oh, yeah.
So what we mean by Unify, this whole conversation of finances to me starts, especially in the marriage context, with honesty and openness.
Definitely.
And just getting on the same page. So something that we did that I feel really set us up for success early on in our marriage. We were dating, we were engaged, is we actually started to open up about our finances. And I remember we had a couple of key conversations where with some set of boundaries to not get so commingled prematurely.
Yeah, which I think is important.
Yeah. We ended up sharing, I remember I was, I'm a little bit older than you, so I was working before you and you were kind of, going into school.
Yeah.
And I was sharing some of my, my financial health with you. And I was saying like, this is what I'm doing. This is what I'm making.
Yep.
These are some of the, ideas that I have for us in our marriage and the way that I think, we should handle finances. It's important, especially, again, it's very common in this country, especially to have student loan debt or consumer debt, that kind of thing. So we kind of shared our situations in that regard.
Yes.
Because that's one of the worst ways to surprise your significant other is like, hey, I love you. And, we're going to spend the rest of my life. Oh, by the way, I've got this huge, pile of debt that I didn't tell you about. And now it's your debt,
Yeah, for sure.
And so
it's our debt.
Yes, it's our debt. So we were able to, convene on that topic.
Yep.
And then even kind of make a plan and understand like, okay, there is some student loan debt. There is, I think, a vehicle debt. This is how we're going to have to shape some of our financial rhythms to account for that and not just like leave it unsettled and ignored, but like we want to take care of that so that we can go earn at the highest clip and save at the highest clip and invest and so on and so forth. So what we're really talking about is taking a stock or taking inventory of things like our income, our debt. Yep. Another thing though that we really benefited from is taking stock in even our lifestyle and our habits.
Yeah.
Me sharing with you like, hey, this is how I typically spend money, and I'm curious how you spend money. As a bachelor and as an entrepreneur early in my career, I lived very, very below my means and very simply, but almost to a point of unsustainability where I was like going super hard as a bachelor where I didn't even have furniture in my apartment and I was like eating standing up.
Yeah.
So I had to kind of share that with you because I didn't want that to be a surprise. Like, some of my financial health, let's say, was actually a function of living so beneath my means that it wasn't really befitting for someone who was about to bring a woman into their home and take good care of them and not just be like living homeless inside of a home, basically.
Yeah. You could say that you had more value maybe on like going out to eat.
Yes.
And I would maybe spend money on like something for my home or something for groceries, I would say. Whereas maybe you were like eating most of your meals out at that time in your life.
For sure.
So differences there, and then saying like, how do we come on the same page? Like we need to have a grocery budget and what does that look like? And like, how can we taper back some of the eating out, and how can we, build a home together and purchase things that will last and are quality, but also are going to fit our budget.
Yeah. And another thing that we discussed that I thought was really helpful was even unpacking some of our, what we describe as our family of origins financial habits and just sort of the way that we saw money handled growing up, so that was also huge because, if you grow up in a house that's like very thrifty and they're savers and they don't really splurge much, chances are you're either going to carry on that same behavior or you're going to rebel the second you get your own money and be like, I'm not living that way. I'm going to go ball out. And so it was really helpful to understand the environments that we saw growing up, and then to just sort of right size and go, okay, how are you thinking of money if and when we have more of it? How are we going to spend it? How are we going to save it? What are we going to do with it?
Yeah.
And I thought it was like informative to know where we came from, because that's going to tell you maybe some of the harder habits to break if they're unhealthy, because, well, I saw this growing up my whole life. So this is just all I know about money.
So important to have that context when you come into marriage of like your family of origin with so many different things, definitely finance included.
Yeah.
And I would just ask you, how did we go about unifying? Because this is all great, like these talking points, but what does that actually look like? Because I think that the money talk can feel daunting to couples. So do you remember like how we did that, how we executed that?
Sure. I mean, so now let's fast forward back to we're married. The plan always was, and it's the thing that we did day one, is unifying literally our finances, meaning we created a joint account and we shared everything with each other.
Yes.
And I know that that's a pretty hot take, especially in today's world of independence and like, I don't need a man and like I'm my own person.
Independent.
Throw your hands up at me. Yeah. So, that's definitely unpopular in some circles, but for us, we just knew that it was a non-negotiable, that like, if we just came down the aisle sharing these vows about like two becoming one, that needs to apply to every area of this relationship, because, we're going to resent each other eventually when we have too many separate things going on when it comes to finances. So that was one of the first things that we did. We combined accounts and we just decided right then and there that like, if two have actually become one, then that means that my money is your money is my money. At the time when we first got married, I was working, I was building the business. You were doing a dietetic internship. So,
unpaid.
Unpaid. It was actually costing money. And so, but we had that conversation. And so that's the beauty of it, is like unity really comes from communication and openness, right? So I wasn't resenting you like, oh my gosh, I've been bamboozled. Like I'm paying for everything, because we talked about it. Exactly. I knew that was actually the plan. You had other opportunities, and I recommended like, let's get married now on this side of things. I'm not waiting any longer for you.
I remember that conversation. Like you were visiting me up at school. And I was like saying like a time frame of like when I thought we would get married. And you were like, oh, no. Like we should get married sooner.
You must be mistaken.
Because I was thinking like, hey, I've got to take care of, some of this financial stuff that I need to do before we get married. But I think, again, the conversations are important, because if your partner is saying, hey, that's okay, like I'm going to carry you. I remember you saying like, I'm going to be your sugar daddy. Just like, come on, let's go.
What's up, girl?
And, that's a sweet thing to be able to have that communication, whether it is to come together in marriage sooner or it is to hold off. That conversation needs to be had. And I was just thinking too, we sat down over coffee and had these conversations. Like we just said, we need to have some financial conversations, and we were deliberate about it. And that's always what's worked for us. I think we've always said, top of the month, right around the first of the month, let's sit down and have a budget meeting, that kind of thing, and get aligned so that we can go into the month with clarity and understanding and unification. So that's something we started from the beginning. We've carried on. I would say in this season, in all honesty, having a child, we've kind of like fallen off of our budget meetings a little bit, but we know it's always something we're going to come back to. Right now, we're just like a little like trying to navigate the newness, but it is something we will always come back to.
Yeah. And to your point earlier, like understanding and defining each other's roles, I think, is really important in the financial relationship, where, like you said, I tend to geek out about those things. So just because we miss the monthly, corporate meeting,
it's still being done,
does not mean that I'm not literally checking the app almost every day.
Right.
And we'll get into some apps and things, some practical tools that we recommend a little bit later. But, that's something where we kind of know, and you can trust in me that like at least one of us is looking at the numbers, and we're not both just sort of like leading the blind, walking into walls financially, so to speak. So, and
that's a good point I didn't even think about, but as you progress in your marriage, more and more trust and more like patterns are clear.
Yeah, that's good.
And so you can maybe have one person handling it, and it doesn't have to be both of you sitting down and doing it. But I think that evolves in time. Yeah.
We made the decision day one to combine and recognize that what I earn is yours and what you earn is mine.
Yeah.
But what that actually produced is this cadence of like far more frequent check-ins with each other, where And we still, to this day, I think this is one of the best habits that we've created in our marriage financially is we check in with each other on just about every purchase. You know, again, we'll get into budgeting a little bit more tactically. You know, for us, we try to have a zero-sum based budgeting model, meaning like every single dollar in the budget or of what comes in has a designation so that there's no, question marks about like, oh, where'd that go? Or how much should I spend? Yeah. And we even budget, our little like allowances, if you will, of like, hey, this is your spending money. This is mine. Yes. But so in that case, like, even though I have a budget of things to spend, I'll still kind of just fill you in like, hey, I needed a shirt for this thing or whatever, or like, it's been a while since I've gotten my car washed, or I'm going to go get it fully detailed, just so you know, that sort of thing. And, vice versa. Yeah.
Just a transparency.
Yeah. And I think that, I mean, again, some could be like, oh my gosh, this is so overkill. You guys are like checking in on this micro level. That's exhausting. I can't keep up with that. That's unsustainable. It makes me feel like, I'm not a grown up because I have to check in. Yeah. That's not the vision for it. The vision is really just, again, unification through clarity and through an understanding that I know that you're not trying to do anything that undermines our financial health. Yeah. And that that's the same for me. I'm not trying to hide anything from you. Yeah. I'm not trying to go, hit up the casino and like lose our life savings like an idiot,
Thank God.
Although, no, I'm just kidding. And so, those are some of the benefits of this type of habitual communication and, honesty with each other.
I love it. So that's kind of the Unify piece. Yeah. Let's talk about clarification. So when we're talking about clarifying finances so that you don't fail in your finances, what does that mean? What kind of comes to mind for you?
Yeah. So quite literally for us, we clarified early on some financial goals, one of which was get out of debt because we found ourselves in debt when we first got married. So we clarified both of our stances toward debt. And I'll be honest, like, before we ended up taking a course at one of our churches called Financial Peace University. It's one of the most, popular programs out there to help people get out of debt and get into financial, a higher financial literacy, that sort of thing. Yep. Before that, I had a slightly different view of debt in the sense that, one, I didn't have much of it coming in. And so I was sort of unused to what that meant. And so when you had some student loan debt and your vehicle, I was kind of content to just like leave it be in the beginning. Yeah. And then we just felt this conviction to, lean in and take the wisdom of that course that we took and the books that we read and decided like, scripture talks about not being a slave to the lender. And like, do we interpret that part literally, or do we just sort of let that be a little bit more one of those ambiguous scriptures that you're like, no, that was for the time back then. It's not really applicable now. And we obviously took it seriously and we said, like, let's not be in that position. Yeah. And so tackling that was one of the biggest unifiers, I think, in our marriage, not just financially, but just relationally. Like we were locked in, man. So again, back to the goals. Goal one was get out of debt. Another big goal was to define sort of our roles and our focuses, financially speaking. So what we meant by that is at that time you were in this dietetic internship. It was unpaid. I was working. We wanted to just define that and like not put any undue expectation on either of us, but specifically on you to feel like you needed to catch up and contribute and, add something to the house. So I think that's another source potentially of enmity between couples at certain times where if you don't talk about that, like there's nothing wrong with both parents, working, that kind of thing. But if you don't talk about it and either spouse has the expectation of the other that like, hey man, this is great that you're staying home on paternity or maternity leave, but like get back to it,
Right. It's just not clearly defined. It leaves room for issues to arise down the road for sure. Yeah. And I'm glad that we have had different experiences where, like you said, at the beginning, I wasn't necessarily being paid while I was still in my schooling process. Then I was taking a salary for many years, and we had different ways that, your income went towards this, mine towards this. That was good. And we, figured out what we did with the lump sum. But now even taking a break from work and being home with our child, like there's no pressure There's no like, I hope this is okay. It's like, we've talked about it. You know what I'm up to. I know what you're up to.
Yeah.
And there's no bad feelings about it.
Yeah.
It's very well defined. And I appreciate that for sure. That we've taken the time just to be able to clearly communicate.
So the next goal that we talked about was having a budget. And like I just mentioned earlier, a zero sum budget, meaning every single dollar goes to a place. So even like, when you're done with the exercise, let's say for us on a monthly cadence, exactly to the cent, even what's going to be saved. If we manage to stay within the budgets that we've allocated.
Yep.
And so what happens naturally, I mean, you'll get better at it and get more accurate the longer you do this practice. But what happens naturally is something comes up, some like accidental thing or, or especially if it's around the holidays, maybe some like surprise get together where you have to go out to eat or whatever.
Yeah.
And so when those things happen, we would then have to move everything else in the budget. So if our out to eats went a little bit higher, well, guess what? That takes away from our savings at the end. And again, back on the Dave Ramsey tip, we've used for many years his Every Dollar app.
Which is great.
Yeah, we use the paid version so that it actually pulls in your banking information.
Yep.
So you could actually see the transactions come through. I think it's like $99 for the year.
Yeah.
Totally worth it.
Totally.
And so that's a budgeting app that we recommend and have used and enjoyed. There's another called Copilot that's a little bit more advanced. I would not recommend that if you're just starting out. That one's more, it gives you more functionality, but I would say Every Dollar is a great kind of beginner app to understand zero-based budgeting.
We first started out using one called Mint years ago.
Sure.
And we felt like it lacked some things that Every Dollar sort of filled the gaps in on. So if someone's thinking about one, I would definitely push to Every Dollar. Yeah,
because Mint is really just like transaction tracking. Yeah. It's not so much budgeting.
It was more so you just kept seeing yourself go in the red. And there was no, like you were saying, you didn't have to physically go and move that savings to a lower number.
Yes.
It's the whole like going in and having eyes wide open for me that really helps with a budget because you're not just like ignorance is bliss, like wee making it through your month. Instead, you're actually like staying cognizant of where everything's going.
Yeah. And because it's a budgeting specific app, it's on your phone. It's always available.
Easy to access.
It's a little less manual than obviously a spreadsheet or something like that. And so that act, like you said, of having to move some of the other areas is the sort of the positive reinforcement that I don't want to make these bad decisions again because this is killing me, that I have to continually lower my savings, lower my this or my that. So,
for sure.
And then, on that same topic, we made goals for saving at the time for a house. So that was like a big early on goal. We were living obviously in an apartment and we said to ourselves, okay, we want to buy in this price range, which means we're going to have to save this amount of money based on the loan product that we were looking at. So it was X% down, which meant this amount of money. And we were just doing that math of like, okay, knowing that we're zero-based budgeting and we know what we're generally going to save every single month, we then Ganted that out and we were like, okay, cool. So it's going to take us X amount of months or years, I don't remember the time frame, to save for this amount of house. And so clarifying early on all of these things, like, your goals, your intentions for your financial health. To me, that's like one of the most core steps, especially after unifying. Like once you get on the same page, okay, now let's make a plan. And that's really what that step was for us.
For sure. That's good. So we've unified, we've clarified, and now execution. So what does it look like to execute? I think we're talking about just putting these things into action, living them out. Realizing that some of this is like trial and error. You figure out what works for you as a couple, right? And then you make adjustments as needed. But you start working it out and you start living it out and figuring out what tools you need to help you succeed. What else?
I mean, for us, it was sticking to the plan, like we said, having these monthly budget meetings. So at the top of the month, I mean, we put it in our calendar and it was a recurring meeting where we'd sit down, and what it looked like is we pulled up every dollar. You would pull up our calendar because, what we don't recognize sometimes is the correlation between our social life and our budget.
It's so important. I remember you used to fight me at the beginning and be like, we don't have to, this is not a calendar meeting. And I was like, no, it truly is, because we would look and say, whose birthday is this month? What are we invited to this month? And it helped us to give our yes and our no to certain things that we were offered throughout the month event wise, and then also be able to correlate like, okay, this is going to be an expense and we need to make a line for it. So over the years we've gelled a little bit better. But I also want to say, like, to this day, I kind of dread the budget meeting. It's not fun.
Sure.
I don't want to act like we're just like, it's budget meeting time. Like, it's really not that fun to do. And who really wants to like look at that stuff dead in the eye? But I think it really does bring peace. And that's why I like, when we miss a budget meeting, I actually say like, man, let's get back on it next month, because I feel more at peace in my mind when I know where everything's going. Like, that really helps.
For sure. And let me speak to that, because I mean, we've actually met a good split of couples where the husband is the, financial minded person, and then others where the wife actually kind of runs the household finances. My mom is more of the bill payer, and so are the tracker, and in my family, I'm the financial guy. So I would speak to the person that leans on my side and encourage them to be a good communicator and a promoter of, this whole system, but also to recognize that just because it's in your head, and I've been guilty of this, does not mean it's in theirs. And so sometimes, like you said, we'll miss a meeting and you'll get really stressed, and you're like, I just feel like we're spiraling. And in my mind, I'm like, are you kidding me? I look at this.
Everything's accounted for
every day, all the time, and so that's on me to let you know and let you in on where we're at, so that if we miss that sort of big, milestone meeting, at the very least, give you the particulars. It's almost like, operating like I'm your CFO and I got to send you the financial report for the month.
Yeah. Everyone should be in the know.
Exactly. So that's always a good tip. So, digging deeper into this execute bucket here. I mean, so for us, when we say run the playbook, like we said, the budget meetings are crucial. Recognizing what tools you can use. Like we mentioned, Every Dollar is a great one, or Copilot. And then, so earlier we talked about defining some of those goals, like saving, investing, giving. For us early on in our marriage, we were taught this principle of like the 3 10s or the 4 10s. I've heard multiple people call it different things. And it also depends on, I would say, your worldview, so the 3 10s, the way I've heard it is, you try to save 10%, you try to invest 10%, and you try to give 10%. And then there's 70% obviously left over. That's typically for bills and your operational expenses, to use a business term. In the Christian worldview, if you are a subscriber to the concept of tithing that Scripture talks about, which we are, I then sort of upgrade it to the 4 10s, where you save 10%, invest 10%, give 10%. So that's just like, generosity, and then tithe 10%. That's a tithe, we believe, is just giving 1/10 of our income back to the Lord, back to the church.
Right off the top too. Not like waiting and like seeing if you have it, but giving it right off the top. And really the concept that, if you've been in church at all, you've heard probably preached many times, is that act of tithing is less about sponsoring our local church so that they can keep their lights on, and more about a symbol of trust, and really a self-sacrifice to say that my money is not my own, and we're just a manager, we're just a steward, and this belongs to God. I'm just giving it back.
Exactly. And when you think about the American way, and really not just in America, we're not the only country that struggles with the love of money and the temptation into greed, but money is such a sensitive topic, and a thing that we can so easily kind of have a cold kung fu grip on, that when you're giving that back to the Lord, it's a true sign of, surrender, essentially, to say, palms up, Lord, you gave me this money in the first place, and so who am I to hold on to it? And so that's, for us, that principle of, let's say, the 4 10s has been a really powerful framework, where what you're trying to do and work toward is a place where, let's say 60% now of what comes in is what you live off of. And you have those other 10% increments that are, again, putting some money away in savings, that are going into investments like the stock market or your Roth IRAs or that sort of thing. Another 10% is the giving, some people get the giving and the tithing sort of conflated, and they're like, oh my gosh, that's so excessive. For us, the tithe is sort of like the commandment, right?
Right.
But the giving is just sort of like out of our generosity, and it's over and above.
Like out of a cheerful heart.
Exactly. Not compulsive.
Exactly.
So that has been a really fun budget line where we've started, we started this years ago, but we, just like you're putting away for your allowance, we put away for spontaneous generosity, whether that's, hey, we're at the dinner table with our friends, let's get the bill. Or, whether it's someone in need. I mean, just this week, we saw a friend of ours who, had a GoFundMe for a medical issue, and it was like, cheerfully we were able to give from that budget because
we don't have to really think about it too much.
Exactly. And that is maybe the biggest key of budgeting, is that once you've made these decisions, they are made now forever, essentially. So we don't have to have this in the moment fight or this aha surprise and shock when something goes out from our storehouse, so to speak, because we've already made that decision. We've already defined that, this is what we have to give, know? So I hate surprises financially, like I can be a little bit of like a Scrooge McDuck where I'm like, I hate to spend money.
Right.
But when we define it early on and you ask me to do something generous, I've grown in that area, really like learning from you, where I used to be like really tight with the purse strings, and you would want to do something nice for someone, and I'd be like, oh yeah, sure, let's do it. Because I just had an unhealthy view, sort of an idolatry in my heart toward money. And I feel like this process of budgeting and designating and continuing to learn that like this money is not our own, we're just managers. It's really helped both of us to be more free with it, and especially when it's something that God is like leading us to do.
For sure. Yeah. And I think, it's always funny talking about money, because it's like, we don't want to sit here and toot our own horns and talk about generosity, but I do think it is important to talk about the very practical piece of just like, that's it. Plan for generosity if you want to be generous, or else it won't happen.
Exactly.
And that's been just something we've learned over time. Let me ask you one question around someone who is still in debt. Do you prioritize those 4 areas, those 3 or 4 areas, or do you wait until you're out of debt and then bring those in?
Great question. I mean, again, for us, the thought that we subscribe to is you tackle the debt first, because we just knew that being in debt while trying to save, invest, give, do all those things, it's always going to feel like this millstone tied around our neck, or like an anchor kind of keeping us in place and not allowing us to fully do all of those things at its, full capacity. So for us, and honestly, again, if you're a Dave Ramsey fan, that's his approach as well, is like, do everything you can to get out of debt.
Definitely tithe while you're getting out of debt.
Yes, good call.
But then add the additional generosity later.
Yeah. And he has a funny line where he's like, in regards to like eating out or, cutting expenses, he's like, the only inside of a restaurant I want you to see is if you're working there.
Picking up an extra shift.
Exactly. And maybe this is more of like a deep dive episode in another context, especially as a business person where, if you have a sound mind and like financial literacy, of course, utilizing good debt in the context of real estate, or, an SBA loan to start a business where, like I have a pro forma and that sort of thing. I'm not completely anti-debt in that regard. But when it comes to just the consumer debt, like I've got credit cards, I've, bought one too many infomercial things, I just kind of lost my way. I think that's the kind of debt that like you definitely want to tackle where you can. Sure. And even the same with student loans, like it's such a epidemic right now of these universities charging 10x what they should. But there's also really creative solutions out there, like across debt settlement or consolidation, where you might not have to pay the full. But again, if you have the means to do it, I think it's a really fulfilling process to get done with that, pay that last. I mean, think about for us when we were paying whatever that monthly was. And then when we made that last payment, all of a sudden we were like that much wealthier, essentially, because we're like, this $500 or $1,000 a month debt payment now is just ours. And we've just felt like, oh my gosh, what do we do with all this money? And for us, that's when our savings goals kicked right in, and that went straight to down payment fund and, saving for the house and that sort of thing.
It can be really fun. I think you can almost gamify the situation of like working on your finances, and, the reward in it is rich. It's wonderful to like feel free from that debt and also be able to make better, more calculated decisions with your money as you have more in hand. It's kind of a sweet process, but it's just ripping the Band-Aid and getting into it. If you aren't, looking at your finances with eyes wide open just yet, this is something it's worth doing. So let's move on to the fourth and final focus. So we said unify, clarify, execute, and the last one is optimize. Can you break that down?
Yeah. So for us, this is the fun part. This is when operating your finances can become really exciting, again, especially for the geek inside. You still might be like, this is so boring. But for us, this is kind of the phase where you've been running the playbook. Things are feeling a little bit systematic, a little bit more second nature in the best way. And so what we started learning is that, okay, we have the same habits that we had when we were like fiercely trying to get out of debt, but now we don't have that debt. And we're saving at this much higher clip.
Sure.
So what do we do with this additional resource?
Yeah.
And so what we started doing is getting creative about where that resource was even stored.
Yeah.
So some of the things that you can look into are, money market accounts or like a high interest savings account.
Yes.
So that's something that we've put our idle cash, if you will, into is these accounts where it's super low risk. It's FDIC insured up to a certain amount so that you don't have to worry about the bank failing or collapsing and losing all your money. But
it's not so like risky as something like crypto.
Oh God, which I have,
everybody has a crypto story.
Yeah, I've got my crypto story. It's a painful one. And so, that's something that we've done where it's safe. The APY, especially in recent years, has been incredible. It's kind of dipping now as rates are dropping. But it's definitely just an out of sight, out of mind. It's way better than a traditional savings account because if you have a savings account with like, Bank of America or any of these large banks, I mean, you're going to earn like 0.1%, just a pathetic little. And
when you say high interest, what's the difference then if you're going from a point?
Yeah. So like I said, with these big banks, it's typically like a point something, it's kind of like a really, really small nominal percentage. With a high interest yield bank account like Ally Bank is one that we've used in the past, or currently we use a Merrill Lynch preferred deposit account. That can be anywhere in the vicinity of like high 3% to as high as 5% with the right bank. So that's massive.
Oh yeah.
And obviously it's all compounding, so the larger sum you have in there, the more exciting that passive APY is. There's also investing then in single stocks, just the S&P. Like, I use the app Robinhood, which is probably the most, de facto well-known individual stock trading app. I'm not going to get into super detailed tactics on that, just because, one, I'm not an expert and have no, certification to tell people how to invest. But I'm just giving you an idea of if you're sitting there with a little bit extra cash and you're like, I want to do some investing, and I just want to go at my own pace. Those are some apps you can use. But also I recommend just, working with a good financial advisor. Look into, the fees. Obviously the fee structure is what's going to make or break where, every time they make a trade, they're earning off of your, off of that transaction. And so just make sure that the fees are within reason to, the fair market rate. Another way to optimize that, again, I would only recommend for those that have been operating a really healthy system for a while and you are trustworthy with your finances and you don't have any sort of issues with overspending or lack of responsibility. But that is actually using credit cards in a creative way. So we've had a lot of great luck using, cash rewards cards, travel points cards. We flew for free for or at least you did. You were a companion pass for me on Southwest for a whole year because of sort of leveraging our travel points and being really creative with how we used those credit cards to our advantage. In business, I have a couple of different cash rewards cards that literally every year end up being almost like a free bonus, for employees or, any other need that we have. And it's, what we try to do is we don't spend money that we don't have, But if we're going to have to spend anyways, like for us in the business, we have a lot of different expenses in terms of like the tools we subscribe to, even, contractor fees and people that we pay. And so we try to just use that Cash Rewards credit card, pay it off immediately. And then at the end of the year, there's all this essentially free money. Like, don't get me wrong. They do those things in hopes that you don't pay the balance.
Right, exactly.
And so whatever cash they're giving
Make
you.
sure you're ready to dabble in that.
Yeah, that's why this is definitely on the optimize, like in the expert mode.
For sure.
Otherwise, don't bother. If you have debt, just cut them things up and, don't try this at home. So there's definitely ways to make those credit cards work for you. But again, be diligent, be careful, and don't just swipe that thing like it's, going out of style.
Yeah, for sure.
And then the last thing that we've, recently explored is finding different ways to make that additional money go toward kingdom purposes and just like big legacy building, things that might actually benefit another generation after us, like our children or our children's children.
That's where like the real estate projects and things like that come into play. It's exciting because sometimes when you are staring at your debt and you're thinking like, do I really want to do all of this unifying, clarifying, executing, optimizing?
Yeah.
It's like really think of the why behind it is so that you can be in financial freedom and you can do these special projects and you can start to bring vision to life because you're in that place financially where you're ready to do that. I think that's the major motivator, right?
Sure.
I think that was the motivator for us as well, as like saying there's some big dreams on our hearts. There's some things that we would love to carry out in this lifetime, but we're only going to be able to do it if we kind of get our finances in order. So that's a huge motivator. So I would just challenge anyone who's like, got a dream on their hearts and just to think like, what is it that I need to do just from a really practical financial standpoint to get to a place where I have more freedom to launch into that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And that makes me think like some of the listeners might be thinking, I actually want to start a business out of this excess. And so I'm going to be living super tight in the interim because I want to save up to, get to this point where I buy this amount of product and now I'm ready to go to market or, pay for this licensing or, get a physical space that, for retail purposes, that sort of thing. And so that's another great way to optimize is that if you are blessed enough to be in that position where like you've done all these other, again, as Dave Ramsey calls them, the baby steps to get to a place where now you've got a little bit of savings left over and then that amount continues to stay consistent. There's all kinds of ways to invest. And that's really like, for us, I think we lightly see ourselves as investors, not in the traditional sense of like going on Shark Tank and, writing someone a check for $500,000, but more so investing as a steward and saying like, okay, God, you've given me this to steward. Yeah. I'm tithing off of it. I'm giving off of it. I'm saving some of it. But I do recognize that, man, if God has given us the energy and the mind and the ability to sort of invest in ourselves and the things around us that feel like these are symbiotic opportunities for our finances, then I'm gonna do everything I can to like play into that and fulfill that and not just wait around hoping that a lotto ticket finally hits.
Or hoping someone else will fund it, that kind of a thing. I think there's an availability that comes with the optimization piece and getting there. So I hope that this episode has been encouraging to the listeners wherever you find yourself on your financial journey. I hope that these principles around not failing in your finances will encourage you to just evaluate, where am I right now? What do I need to do to be on mission when it comes to the financial part of my life? Because it's there whether we like it or not, and it can be an incredible tool if we take hold of it and we are good stewards.
Well, this has been another episode of Quality Time with Gabe and Grace. I'm Gabe.
And I'm Grace, and we will see you next time.
Adios.
Time to love again. My time for love is you. Bye.